What happens when an undercover principal exposes the very people who tried to dismantle his life's work? Welcome back, brilliant minds and wise hearts. This story is for those of you who still believe that truth, integrity, and courage matter. You're the kind of listener who knows that leadership isn't about power, it's about purpose. Today, we take you inside Westbridge Academy, where one man returns in disguise to uncover betrayal, corruption, and cruelty, and then turns the whole system on its head. Stay with us, because what he did next will restore your faith in justice, and maybe even yourself. Dr. Thomas Hale stood at the edge of the cracked staff parking lot, the early morning sun casting long shadows over the brick facade of Westbridge Academy. He hadn't stepped foot on campus in 3 months, not since the board urged him to take a medical sabbatical following his heart surgery. In truth, the physical healing had been easier than the emotional distance. Westbridge wasn't just a school, it was his life's work. He and his late wife Marianne had founded it 20 years ago with a vision. A place where working-class kids and gifted scholarship students learned side by side with the children of affluent families, where creativity and character mattered as much as test scores. As he pulled a faded gray hoodie over his head and picked up a janitor's supply cart, he barely recognized the man in the reflection of his truck's side mirror. Gone was the proud headmaster in his signature blazer. Today he was just Martin, a substitute custodian hired to fill in during flu season. He took a deep breath and wheeled the cart toward the back entrance, heart beating with a mix of nerves and purpose. The rumors had reached him quietly at first. An art teacher was dismissed mid-semester, the orchestra disbanded, the student council shut down. But they kept coming. A former counselor had called him in tears. A parent sent an email with the subject line, "This isn't the Westbridge we knew." And what haunted him most? A photo from a school newsletter showing the mural he and Marianne had painted with the founding class, gone, painted over with a cold corporate logo. That morning, he whispered the words he once spoke to new students at orientation. This school isn't just about knowledge, it's about kindness. Now he needed to find out who had stripped that kindness away. His sabbatical was over in all but name. For the next week, Thomas would walk the halls as a ghost. Silent, invisible, forgotten. But he would see everything. And when the truth surfaced, he wouldn't be asking questions anymore. He would be demanding answers. As the heavy rear door shut behind him, the smell of disinfectant and dust filled his lungs. It was time to find out what had happened to the school that built him. Thomas pushed his mop cart through the rear service hallway, a route he had never taken in his decades as headmaster. The walls, once adorned with hand-drawn student posters and quirky inspirational quotes, were bare now, repainted in a sterile institutional gray. As he passed the main atrium, he paused. The bustling heart of the school that once rang with student chatter, hallway debates, and impromptu music club performances had turned quiet, eerily quiet. Teachers walked briskly, eyes down. No one greeted one another. Even the front office receptionist, once a warm, joking presence, now barely looked up as she handed out late slips like citations. He moved toward the West Wing, where he used to host his fireside Fridays with students. The chairs were gone, the soft lamps replaced with harsh overhead lighting. A new banner stretched across the common wall in bold, all-caps letters. Performance is purpose. The common wall in bold, all-caps letters, performance is purpose. Beneath it, the school's original motto, wisdom with compassion, had been removed. Thomas felt the pit in his stomach deepen. Thomas pushed his mop cart through the rear service hallway, a route he had never taken in his decades as headmaster. The walls, once adorned with hand-drawn student posters and quirky inspirational quotes, were bare now, repainted in a sterile, institutional gray. As he passed the main atrium, he paused. The bustling heart of the school that once rang with student chatter, hallway debates, and impromptu music club performances had turned quiet, eerily quiet. Teachers walked briskly, eyes down. No one greeted one another. Even the front office receptionist, once a warm, joking presence, now barely looked up as she handed out late slips like citations. He moved toward the West Wing where he used to host his fireside Fridays with students. The chairs were gone, the soft lamps replaced with harsh overhead lighting. A new banner stretched across the common wall in bold, all-caps letters, "Performance is Purpose." Beneath it, the school's original motto, "Wisdom with Compassion," had been removed. Thomas felt the pit in his stomach deepen. His first direct glimpse of the change came during the lunch period. Assigned to clean in the cafeteria, he watched the once vibrant room hum with tension instead of energy. Students sat in strict table arrangements, no more free seating. Conversations were whispered, and an assistant principal roamed like a patrol officer. A familiar face caught Thomas's eye. Leo Torres, a sophomore scholarship student he had mentored since the boy's father passed away. Leo's expression was tense as he tried to mediate a misunderstanding between two younger students. Instead of being praised for showing leadership, Leo was reprimanded publicly by a monitor. "Not your place, Torres. Learn to stay in your lane," she snapped. The room went silent. Leo sat down, shoulders hunched, face flushed with shame. Thomas clenched his jaw behind the mop handle. Later that day, while wiping down lockers near the auditorium, Thomas overheard two junior teachers whispering near a vending machine. "Did you hear about this Connolly?" "Gone. No explanation," one said. "That's the third dismissal in 2 weeks," the other replied. "It's the metrics. If your student scores dip, you're expendable." A third teacher walked by and quickly gave them a warning glance. The whispers stopped. What disturbed Thomas the most wasn't just what he saw, but what was missing. Gone were the student-painted lockers. Gone were the impromptu hallway dance rehearsals, the debate club flyers, the welcome signs in multiple languages. The atmosphere felt suffocating, not scholarly. Westbridge hadn't just changed, it had been hollowed out. The people still walked the halls, but their presence was ghost-like. It was as if the soul of the school had been scrubbed clean by policies and PowerPoints. As Tomas emptied a trash bin beside the music room, he noticed the piano was locked shut. A single sticky note read, "Restricted, no practice during academic blocks." He stood in the hallway for a long time after that, the soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above, the silence of a school that had forgotten how to breathe echoing all around him. Each day brought a new disguise, and with it, a new heartbreak. Thomas Hale, known once as the warm and accessible headmaster, now moved like a ghost under the alias Martin. A substitute janitor one day, a lunch server the next, and by midweek a stand-in IT technician. He deliberately rotated his roles so he could observe different parts of Westbridge Academy without raising suspicion. In the cafeteria, he watched students rush through meals in silence, monitored by staff, holding tablets and checking student compliance with nutrition adherence scores. On Tuesday, he stood behind a makeshift server line as a girl was denied lunch for forgetting her ID card, despite clearly being hungry. A teacher watching nearby simply said, "Policy," and looked away. No one offered help. On Wednesday, assigned to clean the special education resource room, Thomas found it nearly empty. The aides were gone. The doors to sensory spaces had been repurposed into storage closets. A student with autism sat alone, confused and overwhelmed, while an overwhelmed classroom teacher barked out timed drills. No accommodations, no support. The teacher, glancing at her phone, muttered, "They cut the sped hours again, just babysitting now." That same day, in a staff workroom while pretending to fix the printer, Thomas overheard a conversation between two young teachers. "I wanted to help that kid today," one whispered, "but if I go off script again, I'll be on the list." "Just give the test, meet your numbers," the other replied. "Then go home and cry like the rest of us." Thursday, he wore borrowed coveralls and carried a fake repair clipboard. His task: troubleshoot Wi-Fi issues in the math wing. While working behind a podium, he listened to a math teacher trying to help a struggling student, only to be interrupted by an admin who coldly reminded her that individual tutoring time must be pre-approved and logged, or it will impact your efficiency rating. Thomas scribbled notes on the back of a used lesson plan. What had once been a learning environment now felt more like a compliance machine, run on fear intimidation, and data manipulation. Teachers weren't teaching, they were surviving. The worst came on Friday morning. While replacing water pitchers in a parent-teacher meeting room, he watched Leo Torres again, now being disciplined by an assistant dean for undermining authority. His crime? Helping a student fix a broken science fair project and being late to class by 5 minutes. "Scholarship doesn't make you special, Torres," the dean hissed. "It just makes you temporary." The phrase echoed in Thomas's ears for hours. By the end of the week, Thomas had collected hours of audio on a small recorder sewn into his uniform sleeve. He'd taken photos of memos posted behind staff-only doors, charts tracking teacher performance against profit targets, lists of students flagged as high cost, low signal, and new policies banning non-curricular clubs. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of the institution he had once nurtured with love. Westbridge wasn't broken, it was being systematically dismantled. Late Friday afternoon, as Thomas emptied a trash bin outside the HR office, a folded piece of paper slipped from the bottom of a file cart, being pushed by a young woman with anxious eyes. She didn't stop, didn't look at him, just kept walking down the hall. Inside the folded page were 6 handwritten words. "I know who you are. M." That night, in the dimly lit janitor's closet behind the gym, Thomas waited. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the door creaked open. It was Maya Leclerc, the junior HR assistant, barely out of grad school, but her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "You don't belong in coveralls," she whispered, "and I don't mean that as an insult." She confirmed what he feared. Interim Principal Brenda Marks was working closely with board member Alan Greaves, an old rival of Thomas's, to sell Westbridge's land and assets to a private education conglomerate. Their goal? Rebrand the school into a tech-centric learning hub, with outsourced instructors and no community roots. Maya had tried to raise concerns but had been shut down. "I was told HR no longer advocates. We only enforce," she said bitterly. She showed Thomas a locked cabinet of complaints. Real cases from teachers and parents, buried under the label "resolved." Among them were letters from dismissed faculty, including Miss Conley, a literature teacher who spoke up after witnessing a student's panic attack, being dismissed as attention-seeking. Maya wasn't the only one watching. Mr. Alvarez, a soft-spoken school counselor nearing retirement, quietly joined their conversation the next evening. "I've seen more kids break down in the last month than in the last 5 years, he said. "But if I report it, I get flagged for resistance." The final ally came as a surprise. Ms. Lillian Brooks, a no-nonsense history teacher with tenure and the quiet respect of every student. She'd been documenting her own observations and keeping copies of removed student projects. "They want us to teach performance, not perspective," she said, handing Thomas a flash drive. "But I didn't get into this job to crush kids." Together, the four formed an unlikely alliance: a janitor, an assistant, a counselor, and a teacher, all bound by a shared belief that schools should be safe, human places. Thomas looked at them and saw not just co-workers, but the last keepers of Westbridge's soul. "We'll need proof," he said. Maya nodded. "Then let's get it." The plan was simple. Pose as a maintenance tech assigned to inspect electrical wiring in the administrative wing, and time it just right to intercept Brenda Marks and Rick Dunning on their way to the morning budget meeting. Wearing a pressed navy jumpsuit with Pastilio Faculty's North Campus embroidered on the chest and a clipboard tucked under his arm, Thomas waited near the elevator bank just before 8:00 a.m. When the doors opened and the two administrators stepped in mid-conversation, he followed quietly, pretending to check a service request form. As the elevator began its ascent, it suddenly jolted to a halt between floors, an intentional glitch created by Maya and the IT team, who had rerouted the elevator circuit under the guise of a system update. The lights dimmed to emergency mode. The elevator stilled. Trapped. Rick groaned. "Not today," he muttered, banging the control panel. Brenda sighed, pulling out her phone. "No signal, great." Thomas stayed silent, adjusting his cap lower and turning slightly away, listening. With no one to perform for, the masks came off. "We've got until next quarter to finalize the teacher cuts," Brenda said coldly. "The board expects full compliance before the acquisition." "What about the scholarship kids?" Rick asked. "Leo Torres and the others?" Brenda scoffed. "They're dead weight. PR assets at best. Once the deal is closed, they'll be phased out." Rick chuckled, pulling a folded document from his briefcase. "I've already got the staff performance reduction list. 20 names. We'll spin it as budget alignment." Thomas's pulse thudded in his ears. The lives of students and faculty were being reduced to spreadsheets and quotas. Then Brenda leaned in. "Saw Hale's mural in the newsletter archive. We really should have painted that over sooner. His sentimentality nearly ruined this place. Good riddance to legacy leadership." Rick nodded. "The board won't let him back, even if he tried." At that, Thomas's fingers tightened around the hidden recorder, sewn into his jumpsuit pocket. This was it, the moment that laid their betrayal bare. The elevator suddenly buzzed. "Maintenance is resolving the issue. Please stand by." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Let's just get this damn meeting over with." As the elevator resumed its ascent and the doors opened, the two stepped out, never giving the quiet technician in the corner a second glance. Thomas remained behind, pressing the button for the basement. He didn't need to hear any more. The tape in his pocket was enough to crack the whole thing wide open. Monday morning dawned with an unusual buzz in the halls of Westbridge Academy. An all-school performance update assembly had been announced late Sunday evening, mandatory attendance for all students, faculty, and staff. Whispers swirled. Would the long-rumored charter acquisition be confirmed? Were more teachers about to be cut? At exactly 9:00 a.m., the auditorium lights dimmed as students filed into rows of folding chairs, and teachers stood along the walls, faces tight with tension. On stage stood Brenda Marks, flanked by Rick Dunning and Evelyn Trent. The Westbridge banner hung behind them, sterile and corporate. But before Brenda could step to the microphone, a quiet commotion rippled through the back of the room. Dr. Thomas Hale walked down the center aisle, no longer in disguise. He wore a simple navy suit, his old headmaster's blazer freshly pressed, the lapel pin with the school's founding crest gleaming. The auditorium fell into a stunned hush. Even students who didn't recognize him sensed something significant. Brenda's expression collapsed into confusion, then fear. Rick looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Good morning," Thomas said evenly, stepping up to the podium. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Thomas Hale. I founded Westbridge Academy 20 years ago, and for those of you who thought I was gone, I've been right here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small remote. "Today we're going to talk about performance, but not yours, theirs." He gestured to Brenda, Rick, and Evelyn. The screen behind him lit up, audio played. Brenda's voice filled the room. "Scholarship kids, dead weight, PR assets at best," murmurs erupted. Then Rick, "We'll spin it as budget alignment." Then the worst, "Good riddance to legacy leadership." Gasps. Silence. Students looked around in disbelief. Teachers began to weep, some from shock, others from the release of months of fear. Brenda leapt to her feet. "This is outrageous! Illegally obtained recordings?" "But," Thomas raised his hand, "actually, Section 3.4 of the Employee Conduct Policy, drafted by your own office, permits recorded observation in common areas and shared facilities." He turned to the stunned crowd. "You've heard how your leadership talks about you behind closed doors. Now you understand why this school has felt so cold, so distant. But that ends today." He motioned to the wings, and 2 board members appeared, nodding solemnly. "Effective immediately, Brenda Marks, Rick Dunning, and Evelyn Trent are relieved of duty. Security will escort you from the premises." Brenda's protests echoed down the aisle, but no one stopped to listen. The room remained hushed as they exited. Then Thomas took a breath. "Now, let's talk about who we really are. Westbridge was never just a school, it was a family. And families protect each other." As the students slowly rose in applause. Tentative, then thundering, Thomas looked out over the faces before him and knew The school was still alive, and the fight to save it had only just begun. In the hours following the assembly, a new energy pulsed through Westbridge Academy. Tentative at first, like sunlight cracking through storm clouds. Staff and students lingered in the halls, whispering not out of fear, but in cautious hope. Thomas wasted no time. By lunchtime, he had officially appointed Ms. Lillian Brooks as interim principal, a decision met with spontaneous applause in the teacher's lounge. Known for her steady hand and fierce belief in student dignity, Brooks accepted with quiet grace and immediately invited every department to send a representative to a new transitional leadership council. Maya Leclerc, the once overlooked junior HR assistant who risked everything to expose the truth, was promoted to Director of Human Resources. "We need someone who remembers what HR is for," Thomas said simply, handing her the office keys himself. One of his first acts of repair was symbolic but deeply felt. He reinstated the student council, disbanded months prior without notice, and invited sophomore Leo Torres to serve as interim president. The moment Thomas called Leo to the stage during the post-assembly staff meeting, the boy's eyes widened. "You reminded this place what courage looks like," Thomas told him. "Now we need your voice to help guide it back." That afternoon, suspended students were quietly reinstated. Teachers who had been dismissed under questionable performance reviews were contacted, invited to return, or at the very least offered a formal apology. Mr. Alvarez, the veteran counselor who had stood firm through the worst of the regime, was publicly recognized and granted full autonomy to rebuild student mental health support. Policies drafted under Brenda's leadership were immediately frozen pending review by the new ethics committee, a mix of students, teachers, and parents. Thomas brought together within 24 hours. Walking through the corridors, Thomas passed open classroom doors for the first time in days. Real lessons underway, laughter starting to return, posters reappearing on bulletin boards. One read simply, "You matter." In the break room, coffee mugs clinked again, not in nervous ritual, but in relief. A second wind carried through the school. It would take time to rebuild what had been broken, but brick by brick, voice by voice, Westbridge Academy was finding its way home. As the days unfolded, Thomas began to feel the true weight of what had almost been lost. Not just policies or procedures, but people, memories, and meaning. He walked the campus each morning at sunrise, alone, retracing the steps he and Marianne once took when the school was just a blueprint and a dream. The familiar scent of pine from the courtyard trees, the faint creak of the library's oak doors. These details struck him differently now, each one a fragile thread holding together decades of purpose. One morning, he stopped in front of the atrium where the original mural used to be, long since painted over. In its place, students had begun a new one, bold colors, powerful images, and a banner in block letters that read, "Light in Dark Places." Below it were handprints, students, teachers, even a few parents. Maya's was there. So was Leo's. Thomas stepped forward and pressed his hand into the fresh paint. Red, bold, unashamed. Throughout the week, he invited conversations, not formal meetings, but real, human moments. He sat on classroom floors with first-year teachers, asked seniors what they wanted to remember most about Westbridge, and shared lunch with the custodial staff who had quietly supported him throughout his disguise. They talked about burnout, about fear, but also about joy, the kind of joy they hoped could return. One afternoon, Mr. Alvarez brought him a small box. Inside were saved artifacts, the original Westbridge crest pin, a photo of the founding faculty, and a letter Marianne had written but never sent, thanking Thomas for never giving up on their shared dream. He read it alone in his office, tears tracing quiet lines down his face. That night, he added a final plaque to the wall outside the auditorium. For every student, teacher, and soul who carried the light when the rest of us forgot how. Westbridge was healing, not from the top down, but from the inside out. Every voice mattered now. Every life had weight. And though Thomas knew he wouldn't remain headmaster forever, he also knew he no longer needed to. The legacy wasn't just in the building or the policies, it was in the people. and they were ready to carry it forward. 3 months later, Westbridge Academy no longer resembled the institution it had become under Brenda Marks. It looked and felt like home again. Students gathered freely in the courtyard after school, music floated once more from the band room, and the front office now greeted every visitor with warmth instead of wariness. The performance-first banners had been replaced with student-lord murals that emphasized growth, kindness, and curiosity. The new ethics committee, made up of rotating faculty, students, and parents, had reviewed over 30 cases and reinstated a dozen unfairly disciplined students. But the most profound changes weren't visible on charts. They were felt in the quiet nods between teachers, the laughter at lunch tables, the staff meetings that now opened with gratitude instead of dread. Thomas Hale had made good on his promise to stay just long enough to rebuild the guardrails. In that time, he'd helped train a new administrative team and transitioned day-to-day leadership to Ms. Lillian Brooks, now officially appointed principal. Maya Leclerc had grown into her role as Director of Human Resources, with a strength and empathy beyond her years. Mr. Alvarez had taken on the new position of Director of Student Wellness, and Leo Torres, once seen as expendable, was now thriving, not only as Student Council President, but as a public voice in school town halls, helping lead conversations on equity and student support. As Thomas packed the last few books from his office, some classics, others filled with notes from staff and students, he paused to look out the window. The view hadn't changed. The old oak tree in the courtyard, the library's arched roof, the track field stretching into the horizon. But the feeling was new. No longer weighted with disappointment or anger, the air felt light again, alive. A soft knock came at the door. It was Leo, holding a small envelope. "For when you leave," he said, smiling, "but don't read it until then." Later that evening, with the building empty and silent, Thomas sat in the front lobby where his journey back had begun. He opened the envelope. Inside was a note, written in Leo's careful looping handwriting. "You've built this school, but more importantly, you showed us how to protect it. Thank you for coming back. We'll take it from here." His eyes stung as he folded the note, tucking it into the inner pocket of his blazer, right beside Marianne's old school crest pin. As he walked out the front doors, he passed the new memorial wall, where photos of faculty, students, and alumni now lived beside quotes and memories from the school's earliest years. One small plaque caught his eye. It read, "To lead is to return when you are needed. To serve is to stay invisible when you are not." With a deep breath and a steady heart, Thomas Hale stepped into the fading afternoon light, his circle closed, his legacy secure, and his school finally safe. The story of Dr. Thomas Hale and Westbridge Academy reminds us that leadership is not about titles, appearances, or control. It's about responsibility, courage, and service. When Thomas returned in disguise, he didn't seek recognition, he sought truth. What he found was a community stripped of dignity, where fear had replaced trust, and performance had been valued over people. But instead of retreating, he leaned into the challenge, listening quietly, observing carefully, and then taking decisive action. Not with vengeance, but with purpose. For audiences, especially those over 50, the deeper message resonates. We are never too old to stand up, speak out, and restore what matters most. Whether it's a school, a company, or a family, systems can drift, but it only takes one person, armed with clarity and compassion, to turn the tide. Thomas's return didn't just save Westbridge, it rekindled hope. The story teaches us that legacies are not built by leaving, but by returning when it counts most, and that the greatest measure of success is not in what we build, but in what we protect. In the end, kindness, courage, and quiet integrity are what endure, and that's a legacy worth fighting for.